Hello there, I'm Evan Cole, and today I am joined by my friend Scott Creech, and today we will be discussing one of the brand new leaked cards from Pokemon Celebrations, Dragapult Prime. Scott, where can we find you on social media?
So you can find me on Twitter at TheDiffTCG, and then also as the admin of Snowpoint Temple on Facebook.
Shout out to Snowpoint Temple. I assume that after this discussion comes out, we will get to have much more conversation on there and on Twitter as well. Now, Scott, tell us a little bit about Celebrations. What's going on here? Why are we even having this conversation to begin with?
Yeah, so Celebrations is a fantastic theory crafting set almost. Pokemon is having their 25th anniversary this year. And to do so, to celebrate it, as we were, they're releasing a set in October called Celebrations, and part of what they're doing is they're releasing a bunch of promos of newer Pokemon in the designs of ages and eras of Pokemon's history. So we have like Dragapult Prime or light toxicity in the form of like Neo Pokemon. We have Mimikyu Delta species, or Hydreigon C, or Zacian Level X, or Greninja Star. Just various Pokemon like that. That's really just kind of going to revolutionize things a little bit. However, they all are not tournament legal, so we don't need to worry about them entering entering standard or expanded legality for any reason. So they're just kind of like for fun Pokemon that they're doing to celebrate all 25 years of Pokemon's history.
And this is the dream, right? Like, us as old format players, we have pretty much been begging for some sort of acknowledgement from Pokemon, whether that's reprints or bringing back old mechanics, even to be introduced to standard. But even if those cards aren't tournament legal like these ones in Celebrations, it's just so exciting to hear that these old mechanics are coming back and are just being, it feels like Pokemon's finally starting to respect its history a little bit, which I personally felt like they weren't doing a whole lot of before this. And even if it's these new Pokemon and these old mechanics, it's super exciting. So with these new promos and these old style, these are cards that actually have like text on them. So while Celebrations isn't supposed to come out until October, fortunately, when it was announced, we did get a few leaks. So not only do we know the names of quite a few of these, as Scott just listed out to us, we actually know what some of them do. So, Scott, let's quickly go over some of these cards that have been leaked and just have a very brief conversation about them before we get on to the main event here. Starting off with Light Toxicity, 120 HP for a Neo-era Pokemon. First attack, heal 30. Second attack, Lightning colorless for 160. What do we think of this in a Neo-era balance?
So it is important to note that the first attack is heal 30 from both active Pokemon, so both yours and your opponent's. So that kind of helps things a little bit. However, 160 damage output just one-shots everything in that format. I think it's the damage output is more or less scaled to today's cards rather than cards from this era, which makes this card feel incredibly out of place and almost feeling like it would be a one-deck meta if this card were to be legal during that era.
Especially since you're doing 160, so the first attack healing 30, it's not like it matters because the defending Pokemon won't have any damage counters on it because you're knocking it out in one shot.
Yeah, like if you're playing the deck right, you're not doing anything less than a one shot on any of your turns.
Yeah, unfortunately, Light Toxicity seems way too strong. 3 for 160 is just concerning. I mean, I think Shining Charizard has a 5 for 100 attack that has all the downsides in the world. So 3 for 160, unfortunately, that is just way too much. Next up here, now this is interesting, Mimikyu Delta for an EX era style, 70 HP, one water to draw 2, and then a water and a colorless deal 40 damage and return an energy from the defending Pokemon to the opponent's hand. This one's interesting.
Yeah. From what we can tell, based on the art of the Mimikyu, it's designed to be closer to Crystal Guardians era of Delta species than it was supposed to be for Holland era. That puts it in a little bit more context here. So you're looking at formats legal for 2007, 2008, and then also RS through PK for the entire EX block. So with that context in mind, so we're not really looking at it in a 2006 perspective at all. RS through PK, I think this slots really well into a deck like Rayquaza EX Delta and Stantler. Just as a way to hard lock your opponent even more. I think it slides in there easy as like a 1 of, maybe a 2 of, just to find a way to continue to lock your opponent out, and just as an option card more or less. In 2007, I think that if you're looking at very similar decks, you could see it going into something like Destiny, where you want to have as diverse of a game plan as possible. Destiny also lends itself to be able to be teched for just about any meta game as well. Then moving to 2008, there are a whole lot of decks that I could see this being really successful in.
Like maybe Empoleon, but it might not be good enough.
Yeah, I think that it could be a really great starter in Empoleon because of water, draw 2 just for the first attack. I think that once we get to 2008, with all of the Diamond and Pearl Pokemon that they released, at that point, it's just getting too power crept at that point. And so your damage output isn't high enough to be relevant. It's getting one-shotted by a bunch of things. I could see maybe a 1 or 2 of an Empoleon, potentially more specifically the Ambush variant, with Marowak in there. But I don't think that it's too playable in 2008.
Yeah, I agree. It seems like overall, definitely a good card, and it seems like it could certainly be powerful, but it certainly doesn't seem game breaking. Seems like it fits very well into the era, especially that second attack. That disruption is exactly what this format is kind of known for. And just as an aside, real quick, the reason why we are not actually naming these attacks is because at this time, the cards that have been leaked are in Portuguese. So we do not have the English translations officially. However, shout out to our friend Brett Stratton, who went through and translated all these cards so that way we know what the attacks do. We just don't quite know the exact names yet. So right now we are focusing solely on the effects of the attacks. This next one here, Hydreigon C, an SP Pokemon, has been leaked. Double colorless energy for 30, and then dark colorless for 100 damage, and a 20 snipe to 2 bench Pokemon for 110 HP. This card intrigues me.
Yeah, this one's really interesting. It's important to note that it has a grass weakness, keeping in line with typings of the modern era versus typings of Diamond and Pearl era, where this ideally would have been printed in. Seeing a lot of just ideas bouncing around in terms of throwing it into something like Chenlock in 2010, or potentially even a deck on its own. The 100 damage is really relevant. It knocks out a lot of things, especially once you tack an expert belt onto there. And being a 110 HP basic, that's higher than almost everything else in the format. I think your next highest as a basic is Regigigas at 100. So you're really kind of pushing things a little bit here. I think it's a little bit more like playable in the format than something like Light Toxtricity. I don't think it's quite overpowered enough to where you just have to write it off for the format entirely. I think the second attack requiring dark, colorless is incredibly relevant with that second pip of dark, just because it forces you to accelerate in weird ways. As even if you were to like Team Galactic's energy gain and attach it to there, you still require dark, and so that's at least 2 turns to get it powered up. You're looking at potentially your best partner being Weavile to accelerate dark energy, and even that seems really clunky.
I agree. Yeah, it does seem like Hydreigon is pushing it, especially in the HP department, but that double dark is probably what anchors it down. You know, this is a Pokemon that can't abuse double colorless energy. Thank you, by the way, for that. I cannot imagine how this card would look if it did just require 1 dark. But that double dark does mean that SP would have fewer chances for energy shenanigans. It still seems pretty powerful, probably on the border, but I think we'd have to see it in action. And I do think that if we did see it play and actually use it, it probably wouldn't be as strong as it initially seems. But I think Hydreigon is definitely a case where we'll probably have to give it a try before figuring out for sure.
Yeah.
But this is next card. I don't think anyone is even questioning whether or not anyone would ever use this in old format. Zacian level X, 160 HP, Pokebody to prevent all effects by defending Pokemon, and metal colorless for 240, and you can't attack next turn. What?
Yeah, so your
3 for 240?
Your damage output here is completely asinine, and it's very much just the quintessential idea of this Pokemon was designed for modern numbers rather than like retrofitted to this format. Because 240 knocks out literally everything in the format. 160 base HP on a stage 1 that becomes a basic that becomes a level X. Like that's even stage 2s are struggling to hitting that kind of number. On top of a Pokebody that effectively gives all of its attack shred, before you even begin to consider the idea of making some other Zacian legal as well. Like this card is just completely bonkers. It's so overpowered in a 2010 or 2011 setting. Even if you were to write it down to like 2009, like now you're just getting even worse.
I agree. Plus, like, it has fire weakness, which is the best weakness in the game because there are no good fire types in the format. I don't think there's much more discussion about this card. It's way too good.
Yeah, like all your fire types in this format are hitting for 80 damage max, which is
the best thing we have is Entei Raikou.
Yeah. Like
I think that'll one shot it, but still.
And even then, if you were playing this in like Majestic Dawn through Call of Legends 2011 pre-rotation, just boom, slap a bubble code on it, and your opponent goes, yeah, let's go to game 2.
I agree. Zacian, unfortunately, way too powerful, but there is a 5th card that was spoiled with this set, and that is the card that we want to really sink our teeth into today. It's Dragapult Prime. And this, tell me if you agree, this was the card I was by far the most intrigued and enamored by with that set of 5.
I agree. Like this card is just a brewer's paradise, and I feel a large part of that is due to 2011 as a format, as well as subsequent Heart Gold, Soul Silver era formats as well.
Yeah, so that's where Scott and I wanted to really place our emphasis and focus on, was in particular the 2011 Worlds format, Heart Gold, Soul Silver through Black and White, and the question was, how does Dragapult fit into this format? So that will be our main discussion today, is discussing Dragapult, where it fits in the format, how we would build it. But first, let's actually talk about what this card does. So Dragapult is a Stage 2 Pokemon Prime, Psychic type, 150 HP. Now, actually, the day that we are recording this, the English translation of this card has been released. So now we get to know what the attacks are called. So the first attack is called Mock Turn, a psychic for 60 damage, and you may switch this Pokemon with one of your bench Pokemon. Awesome. Second attack, Diving Swipe for 150 for 3 energy. Psychic colorless for 150. Discard a random card from your opponent's hand. Whoa. Dark Weakness, Fighting Resistance, and no retreat cost. This is a beefy card.
It's a house, for sure.
Now, the question I think that we should discuss briefly is how much of a house is it? You know, with the 4 other cards that we looked at, there were certainly various levels of power creep with respect to their eras. 3 for 240 on Zacian is stupid. Same with 3 for 160 on Light Toxicity. And I think a big question for Dragapult is that clearly these stats are impressive, but are they overpowered? And the interesting thing, Scott, is that if you look at each stat on its own, every single one of them has been topped before. For example, 150 HP, well, Tyranitar Prime has 160. 1 for 60 in this format is like fine. You know, that's what Kingdra does. I mean, Yanmega does 0 for 70.
Donphan, you're looking at 1 for 60 as well.
Exactly. Donphan, Yanmega, Kingdra, there are many examples of 1 for 60. That's just normal. And then 3 for 150, that is matched by Magnezone. But I think that 3 for 150 is going to be the biggest point of discussion about this card.
Yeah. This the 150, it's nice because it knocks out a lot of things in the format, but not necessarily everything. Like as you had said, Tyranitar Prime has 160 HP, so you're going to wind up 10 short there. Believe all of your legends have somewhere between 140 and 160 HP. You're not knocking out all of those. This card 150 is a big key number in this format. It's not necessarily gonna completely wreck the format at all.
I think that's the question, right? Is 3 for 150 with no downside, there's actually additional upside. Is that too strong for the format for 2011? And that is the question that I think bears most discussion and thought over, which is why you and I took it upon ourselves to actually play with Dragapult. So how do we play with Dragapult in 2011? So we're going to hold off the question of should it be allowed until the end. But for now, for the rest of this video, until we get to that question, we're assuming that we are going to be playing Dragapult in the 2011 format. Now, Scott, I don't know if you noticed, but Dragapult's a stage 2. How are we actually going to get this into play?
So there's 2 ideas here, is that you can either have just Dragapult legal, in which case you're looking at almost exclusively Mew Prime decks to be able to see off and use the attacks that way. Or there's the argument of making Dreepy and Dracloak legal as well.
Now, the biggest concern before we try this with Dreepy and Dracloak is that these are cards that are so much newer, they're probably really power creeped, right? Well, actually, no. Dreepy is a 60 HP, the attack sucks, 1 retreat cost. Dracloak, 90 HP, both of its attacks are like okay, 1 retreat. I think Dreepy and Dracloak fit right in with all the other basics and stage 1s in 2011.
Yeah, like, it's just simply, they're not overpowered in any way. In the games we played, I never found an instance where attacking with either of them threw the game out of proportion or into someone's favor in one way or another. They're almost perfect for the era, to be entirely honest, because we only have the 1 printing of both so far, and 1 printing is really all we need for the format.
We are certainly very lucky that the 1 printing either of these cards have fits perfectly with the format. Really, the only blemish is that the resistance is 30 instead of 20, which is weird because all the other cards in this format have minus 20 resistance. But otherwise, I see no problem with Dreepy and Dracloak. You put these in the format, nobody will bat an eye. They probably won't even notice because they're just so balanced for the format.
I think the only potential thing with the resistance is an instance where you have to stick it up versus a Donphan Prime. and with a 70 HP basic, like your things get a little bit funky. Actually, no, Dreepy has 60 HP anyway. Never mind.
Exactly. These cards are perfect for the format. So I don't know about you, Scott, but I think Dreepy and Dracoloak should totally be allowed. How about you?
I'm all for it. I think you have to allow them exclusively in Dragapult decks, in my opinion, just to be able to make sense thematically for the set. But I see no problem with it.
So, okay, now we know that we can actually use the card. So we actually have a basic stage 1 and stage 2 line. So now we have to actually put them in the decks. So before we discuss how we would build Dragapult, let's take a closer look at the card and decide what we like about it and what we don't like about it. Let's start with the positives because I think there are a lot of them. 150 HP, massive. And not only that, but it has free retreat, which is not something you would expect to combine with a 150 HP Pokemon, which could also be a questionable design choice, but we have to acknowledge it as one of the biggest benefits of Dragapult.
Yeah. Having that free retreat gives you a really interesting pivot point, and it's nice to be able to in a format that lacks a lot of free retreaters, just being able to stick something active after a knockout and be able to move out of it if you need to. It's also really interesting for certain switch plays where a Pokemon may not be able to use a specific attack or attack in general, switching into Dragapult and then just using the free retreat that way. So there's a lot of niche cases specifically around the retreat.
Well, especially with, speaking of pivot points, let's talk about this mock turn attack. This is an attack that we have seen throughout Pokemon's life. It's not a new effect, but usually when this effect is powerful, it's because you have good bench sitters to actually switch into. How does mock turn fit into this format? Because I don't really see many good Pokemon you actually want to switch active in 2011.
Yeah, in 2011 it gets really interesting because you either have to have something in the active, or rather put something in the active wants to sit there and just soak up damage, or you want to throw something in the active that you can immediately move out of the active. That's either going to be something with free retreat, or potentially playing like Odrio from Triumphant, which reduces the retreat cost by 2. Even then, for basic Pokemon or evolution Pokemon that you're throwing up there, that it really limits a lot of options in the 2011 format.
As far as I'm concerned, the list is 2. We basically have Absol Prime and Victory Bell from Triumphant, and honestly, neither of those effects are that enticing. I mean, Victory Bell's a stage 2, which already makes it such a challenge. And Absol Prime is cool, but when it comes to Pokemon you want to pivot into, how many times are you actually going to be able to punish your opponent benching a Pokemon before your Absol starts to just become a dead card? And, you know, one of the things that I think we've all thought of when we consider Dragapult was Smeargle. That's a Pokemon you want active that has a powerful Pokepower. But you putting Smeargle active on your opponent's turn, they're just going to knock it out before you ever get to actually use Portrait.
Yeah.
So I think Smeargle is a no-go in Dragapult.
Yeah, I would agree there. It's not worth the value in any circumstance, really. There's a strong argument for it in early turns of the game, but at that point you don't even have Dragapult up usually, and so it just winds up being a bit of a non-bow.
Which is unfortunate because you would think that of all the effects to switch your Pokemon into, you would love to get a Portrait, but it doesn't seem like it's going to work with Smeargle. So we have a potential hit and run strategy with Dragapult, although in this format it gets dicey because there are few, if any, Pokemon you actually want to switch into. So it does seem like Diving Swipe is the bread and butter, the meat and potatoes rather, of the Dragapult deck. Now, how would you build Diving Swipe, Scott?
How would I build Diving Swipe? So, in my approaches, I try to take the case of what's the best thing to be doing all the time. And I feel like finding a way to turbo out the diving swipe for the damage output alone is generally worth it. There's a couple of different engines you could run. The first engine is trying to bin psychic energy off the bat, and then playing Jirachi down, picking some coins, attaching energy that way, and then Shaman Celebration Wind. The other engine there is, instead of using Shaman, you use Miss Magius. Simply move one of the psychic energy per turn. I favor Shaman because I feel it's a little bit more explosive. It's a basic as opposed to a stage 1, so you don't have to battle consistency with yourself on that end. Additionally, even though it's a one-time effect, you generally, if you load up a Dragapult with 3 energy, you're gonna have enough turns to load up a second Dragapult manually.
Yeah, so we saw Jake Gearhart was theorizing with Miss Magius, which I have a little confession to make. Until you said something right now, I thought Miss Magius was as often as you want during your turn, like every other energy trance effect. But no, you're correct. It's only once per turn, which is something new for me to keep in mind with comparing these effects. And then with the Shaman engine, I know that's the one that you've been preferring. Very, very reminiscent of the ZPS engine that we all have come to know and love from this format. And very explosive. Being able to turbo out a diving swipe on turn 2 is certainly a strategy worth holding, because diving swipe is the premier attack of this deck and possibly of the format. So getting it out as soon as possible, definitely a great plan. But there's also another line of text on diving swipe. Discard a random card from your opponent's hand. Do you think we could do anything to abuse that type of strategy, Scott?
Yeah, so that was the other approach that I took in building decks for Dragapult, is I wanted to create something kind of like the Trevenant Dusknor GX deck that just completely ran over expanded for a hot minute. And Diving Swipe is actually really reminiscent of Nightwatch, which is very, very similar effect. Essentially, like, you just want to strip your opponent's hand of resources, because at that point it doesn't matter what your opponent has on board. If they don't have a hand to play with, they can't do much of anything, and the oppressive 150 damage every turn on top of that just doesn't give them a chance to really catch their breath. The flip side of it, though, is that Magnezone Prime is very popular in this format, and even if you were to discard a card from their hand, that's one more card they can draw with Magnezone Prime. And constantly being able to draw up to 6 every turn sets them in a way so that way the secondary effect doesn't do much.
That is true. However, I do want to say that, you know, if your opponent has Magnezone Prime, hand disruption isn't going to work anyway. But Diving Swipe is going to one-shot a Magnezone. And for decks that are not running Magnezone, 2011 has one of the best hand disruption systems in the game, which is surprising and something I don't think people have given much respect to when it comes to this format. But there are a lot of ways to disrupt your opponent's hand and board. And luckily for us, there is a pair of Pokemon that could work quite well when it comes to denying resources. We've got Weavile, Undaunted, and Slowking from Heartgold Soul Silver. Care to explain how these two work out for us, Scott?
Yeah, so the idea is kind of to sit there and kind of using like the Ambipom Weavile deck as a basis almost. Essentially, you sit there with Dragapult and you swing 150 and you discard a card from their hand. Slowking allows you to go in and manipulate their top deck. And then Weavile also discards cards from their hand when you play it down to evolve.
And you see their hand.
Yeah, that's the other big thing. So your ideal turn, you judge them, and then find like a communication or a Weavile to turn around, claw snag, discard hopefully a supporter from their hand. the rare instances where they have two, or just two draw cards in general, you can claw snag one and then hope to diving swipe the other, because it turns your odds from like being impossible to hit both to you're definitely hitting one, and you have a 1 in 3 shot of hitting the other. And then from there, you can just slow king to manipulate their top deck, remove any draw supporters from there, and just give them a bunch of energy instead. And then you just swing and take knockouts, and the idea is to completely cripple your opponent as much as possible.
Definitely a powerful strategy, and I think one that we should consider when building Dragapult. Now, we've gone through all the strengths, but Dragapult does have some weaknesses, and if we are going to allow Dragapult in the format, I think we need to discuss them, both if you are playing as Dragapult and you want to be able to figure out what to play against, and also if you're playing against Dragapult, you need to know how to beat it. And Scott, I think through playing, we have discovered a few weaknesses that Dragapult has, and let's just start with the first line of text on the entire card, which says Stage 2. There are hardly any actual Stage 2 decks in the format, which feels a little surprising considering how ubiquitous Magnabore is, or Magnezone in general, given all the Magnezone variants. But aside from Magnezone, the only Stage 2 Pokemon in the format are very powerful support Pokemon like Emboar and Typhlosion. Otherwise, generally, they just can't keep up.
Yeah, like, a lot of your Stage 2s in this format are very dependent on being support Pokemon. They aren't really attackers. Magnezone, mainly a support Pokemon that occasionally attacks. Typhlosion, support Pokemon that occasionally attacks. You absolutely need it to. Emboar, support Pokemon. If you have to attack with it, you're losing.
Yes.
You have
there's Tyranitar.
Yeah, Tyranitar is about the only one that's not a support Pokemon. Serperior, support Pokemon. If you're attacking with it, you're losing.
Same with Kingdra, really.
Yeah, like you have on the fringe, you have Blastoise. That deck is kept in check by Magnezone and Zekrom.
So there must be a reason why Stage 2s aren't really around, and I think the reason is pretty clear. Rare Candy is nerfed to hell. To the point where, you're still going to use it if you're in a Stage 2 deck, but it definitely does discourage... Well, it cripples Stage 2 decks. Especially with Jirachi in the format. Because you can Rare Candy into a Dragapult, and all of a sudden, they just slam Jirachi, Time Hollow. Whoops, you have a Dreepy again. What are you supposed to do?
Yeah, I think Jirachi is already fairly used in the format, and I think if Dragapult was in the format as well, we'd see a massive uptick in Jirachi being teched into decks, just because of how good being able to knock it back down to a Dreepy is. Yeah, like your Stage 2s are just they struggle to prop themselves up. This is the first format where we see nerfed Rare Candy, and it shows pretty heavily. It doesn't help that this set that this format is only a five set format. God, that was a mouthful. It doesn't help that this format is a 5-set format, because you don't have a whole lot of options there, really. Your best Stage 2s are rough at best, and there's just no support for them.
I agree. And, I just thought of this. There's kind of a hidden detriment of being a Stage 2 in this format, and that's deck space. Think about it. You have to run 4 Rare Candy. And even if you're running a 3-2-3, that's 12 cards in your deck already being used. If you run like a 4-3-4, that's 15. That's a quarter of your deck being dedicated just to Dragapult and Rare Candies. So deck space is going to be a problem for Dragapult. And I think we found that to be a problem when we built our lists. We just need more space in Dragapult to really make it work. But I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit here. Otherwise, Dark Weakness is certainly annoying. We've been discussing Tyranitar a couple times, and that's just an auto loss, right? Like, you can't do anything against Tyranitar.
Yeah, with Tyranitar having 160 HP, like, you're not one-shotting it. They are one-shotting you.
Yeah.
And even if they aren't one-shotting you, they're setting up fantastic math to be able to come in with a Jirachi and just time hollow, take out all your Dragapults, and then go, okay, now what do you want to do?
Exactly. And aside from Tyranitar, there is one other Dark type lurking in this format that I think is a big problem for Dragapult, and that's Zoroark. For just a double colorless, they can use your own diving swipe, one-shot your Dragapult, and discard a card from your own hand. I think that's a big problem for Dragapult decks.
Yeah, I think if Dragapult was introduced in the format, you'd see a lot more 2/2 and 1/1 Zoroark lines being slid into decks, just as an answer to it. You also have some niche plays where if you're already running plus power in a deck like Stage 1 Rush or in like ZPS or something, and you can turn around and go double plus power.
Mock turn.
I was thinking mock cut, and I knew that wasn't right. You can turn around double plus power, mock turn, pivot into something else, and now your Zoroark is protected from a potential knockout as well. Just saving it for another Dragapult.
That's a great point. And I think Zoroark is going to be something Dragapult decks really need to keep in mind. And that's something I kept in mind for my decks. But again, getting a little ahead of myself here, a little foreshadowing. And lastly, I think this is something that we found more as we actually play tested. Vileplume definitely seems like it's going to give Dragapult a run for its money, which might just be a symptom of being a Stage 2 deck, but Vileplume does seem like an answer. What do you think, Scott?
I think Vileplume is very good against Dragapult because your options are... you essentially knock yourself down to a few options. You can either play Dragapult in a Mew deck, then Vileplume isn't a big worry, or you can go with a really thick Dragapult line as a Stage 2, not worry too much about DCE. You can, cut down to maybe 3 or something if you're playing a 4/3 line. Even then, like you're still slowing yourself down to get around the trainer lock.
Or you could just play heavy reversal and hope to snipe the Oddish or Gloom before it gets up. But if you're doing that, then if you miss your opportunity and Vileplume comes down, those reversals just take up all that space. You have to hope you have a Juniper or something to get out of it, but at that point, you're having a problem on your hands. It does seem like Vileplume is one of the stronger counters to a Dragapult deck that probably should be seeing more play, to be honest. I think Vileplume is not given enough love in this format. It's really good.
Yeah, like, especially when your arguable BDIF in The Truth runs Vileplume, like it just, in a tournament setting, this deck probably has a very rough time.
Well, we will definitely talk about Dragapult's The Truth matchup here in a little bit, but for now, let's actually start talking about how we decided to build Dragapult. And we're going to start with the first list I built for the deck. In hindsight, I don't think it's very good. I have moved on from then, but every single deck list that you are seeing in this video will appear in a future video. I don't think I actually mentioned this yet, but Scott and I had a chance to sit down and we played so many games with 2011. Most of them had Dragapult in them, and we recorded them. So after this video comes out, we will have our Dragapult gameplay videos. So that way you get to see for yourself how Dragapult plays against the rest of the format, as well as how our deck lists performed individually. And so because of that, I feel obligated to discuss this list, even though I don't think it's very good. So as you can see, this deck is kind of all over the place. We have a 3/2/3 Dragapult, a 2/1/2 Reuniclus, 1/1 Donphan, a Zekrom, a 1/1 Kingdra. I don't really know what I was thinking here. A 1 of Twins was weird too. But the idea of this deck was basically rely on Dragapult, use Donphan if you're up against any dark types, and try to use Reuniclus to keep your beefy Dragapults alive. And then once you have enough damage on the board, you use Seeker, pick up your Dragapult, and get rid of all of that damage. I can't think of much more to say about this list. I kind of just want to move on to what I think is the much better deck, which is a honed in version of the previous deck. This one is purely Dragapult, Donphan, Reuniclus. Now, this is a point of contention that from all the discussion I have seen and read online, I think I am the only person who has said this so far, but I think Donphan is an absolute must run in Dragapult, especially for those fighting decks. I don't think Dragapult has a chance against Zoroark without being able to punish it immediately with a Donphan's Earthquake. So my approach to this deck is Dragapult is our main attacker, but Donphan comes in to be a support, and Reuniclus is there to try to soak up all of the damage that either is dealt via Earthquake or just Dragapult is just takes because it's a 150 HP Pokemon, and then pick it up with a Seeker, act like nothing ever happened, and keep going from there.
I really like this version. It plays very well against those dark type decks, as you mentioned, and in gameplay with it, you kind of are forced to deal with their Reuniclus, which isn't really something that you see in this format organically. Just because it presents such a situation with Dragapult's really high HP and Donphan's ability to just soak up damage like none other. You can create a situation really quickly where you just have a Donphan soak up a ton of damage, you switch it into the bench, Seeker it up, you already have a Phanpy down, you play the Phanpy, and then just retreat back into the Donphan. And you can either use Dragapult as a attacker in it, or as a pivot point with the Donphan, and that is terrifying.
Yeah, that exoskeleton actually does help a lot with becoming a Pokemon you can want to throw in the active. Getting to soak up that damage and reducing it by 20 helps a lot. I know we said there aren't many Pokemon that we think you could comfortably switch into, but Donphan feels like one of them, and it's just another line I think the deck has. I think this list is quite dynamic. You have Mock Turn, and you have Diving Swipe, and you have Earthquake as attacking options, and it's just pick which Pokemon you need at the moment. It runs 2 Switch, which in building this deck, as I mentioned earlier, list space is very tight. Especially this list runs 2 stage 2 lines, and so trying to run a healthy amount of Switch and also trying to run Pokemon Reversal to help the deck stay aggressive, because we are primarily doing 1 for 60 with 3 for 150 kind of being like a late last resort. There's not much space here, and I think in order to improve this deck idea further, we need to somehow find a way to get all the cards that we actually need in the deck. Maybe that involves reducing the energy count. I'm not sure. 11 feels a little low, but
11 to me actually feels a little bit high, especially if you are leaning into the 1 energy idea. And just with efficient attackers, you could also potentially trim a Dracloak. However, at that cost, you're decreasing your matchup versus Vileplume decks.
I don't think you'll win a single game against Vileplume with 1 Dracloak, which is a concern. I think Vileplume, you have to keep Vileplume in mind, which is why you need to keep the numbers up. You'll notice I don't even have room for Jirachi in here, which I don't like that. I want to have Jirachi in the deck, but there's just so little deck space.
It's really hard to balance consistency between multiple stage 2 lines, and a lot of times you're throwing in at least 1 stage 1 line as well. Then also be able to have the draw power you need, the search that you need, because you're running multiple stage 1s. because you're running multiple stage 2s and a stage 1, you just there's not enough room for everything, and you have to make a concession somewhere.
Unfortunately. But overall, I really like this list. I think this is going to be my de facto Dragapult variant. I like the way it plays. It meets its matchups well, about as well as I think a Dragapult deck can. And honestly, it's fun to play. There's a lot of choices to make, and I think the Reuniclus line is what sets it over the top for me, which is a little surprising. I don't think Reuniclus plus Seeker is an idea that we really thought of initially with Dragapult, but it's a combination that I have become much more enamored by over time, especially as I've played this deck more.
Alrighty, so kicking it over to my builds of the deck. My first build, in all honesty, was pairing Dragapult with Magnezone, and then also Electrode Prime, just to turbo out the 150. I realized that that's just not a good idea. And from there, I transitioned to the Jirachi engine. So this list is kind of inspired a little bit by Franco Takahashi's Lost-Scar build from US Nationals this year, except instead of Gengar, I'm running Dragapult and kind of focusing on the damage output there instead of a Lost World mechanic. So my idea here is kind of to really be a turbo diving swipe deck with a backup of Magnezone as an attacker, since one of the niche things you can do is you can Jirachi, Accelerate Energy, Celebration Wind where you need it, and then come in and Lost Burn to knock out things with 160 HP that you may not be able to knock out otherwise. So that's kind of where this deck is coming from. One of the concessions that I made while building it was I had trimmed down to a 4-1-3 line for Dragapult. It could potentially be trimmed down further to a 3-1-3 line. You could shift things around to a 3-2-3 line. But I'm pretty confident that 3 Dragapult is correct, since it's not a card that you want to see a whole often. Especially being a stage 2, it can be really rough. Some other things that I opted for in this list was I run the 1 Flower Shop Lady, because you are aggressively binning things so often with Sage's Training and Professor Juniper. Allows you to just pull Pokemon back, pull energy back into your deck to give you some longevity in case the game does go into a long game. Additionally, Seeker plays a big role because it allows you to either reuse Shaman, Jirachi, or pick up something. I would consider potentially even running a second one if you really wanted to push things. Additionally, I feel, well, you may feel that a Donphan is a must in any Dragapult deck. I feel Pokemon Reversal is a must in any Dragapult deck. Purely because Magnezone is such a threat in this format. It's so ubiquitous. You find it in almost every list in some aspect. And it just cripples the discarding portion of Diving Swipe. And so being able to Reversal Magnezone, pull it up, and one-shot it tends to set your opponent back quite a long ways. One of the other techs that I threw in here was 1 Energy Switch, just as a way to continue to manipulate the energy on board, especially being able to get it back with Junk Arm. Additionally, I don't like the idea of being able to have something trapped active, so I do run the 1 Switch as well. That can be reused with Junk Arm.
Yeah, Switch does feel really good, and I want to compliment you on that Energy Switch. I think that's the spiciest tech I've ever seen in my life.
I honestly would not have thought of the Energy Switch, but I was talking with Xander Bennett about this list at like 2 a.m. he was like, okay, you need to run energy switch. And I was like, I don't see it. And he goes, dude, you can reuse it with junk arm. And I go, okay, yeah, you're right. Let's just throw one in.
That's so funny. Reminiscent of like tech supporters with Versus Seeker in the format. I wanna say I think I agree that Pokemon Reversal is so important for Dragapult exactly for the reasons that you stated. Magnezone is like one of the few Pokemon that can one-shot Dragapult, and so being able to drag it up early is important. Also, Zorork. Since Zorork is a stage 1, they're going to have to at least bench the Zorua and wait a turn, which gives you time to knock it out with Reversal before they can evolve into Zorork and foul play your Diving Swipe. But overall, this is a very interesting version of Dragapult. The one Dracloak and one Magneton does give me a few concerns for Vileplume. How do you feel about your Vileplume matchup with this list in particular?
So with this list in particular, you just accept that it's a bad matchup. It's like I said, it's one of those concessions that you have to. Do you cut your consistency? Do you cut your search, or do you just cut the idea that Vileplume is beatable? It really isn't if you're running multiple stage 2s in this format. It's just so rough.
And so that brings us to the second list that you brought to our session. This is your Disruption Weavile Slowking variant of Dragapult. Tell us about that.
So this one is aiming a little bit more towards a discard route. Like as I was discussing earlier, your ideal turn is to come in, judge your opponent, Weavile, Claw Snag, Slowking, Second Sight to control their top deck, then Dragapult, Diving Swipe to discard another card from their hand. So effectively, you've put them on a 2-card hand you know of. You're aware of what both the cards are, on top of what their top deck is. So it was my best attempt at recreating the Nightwatch expanded Trevenant Dusknoir GX deck from earlier last year. So the idea is just simply trying to cripple your opponent as much as you can, because doing 150 every turn can be incredibly oppressive. I do have one Rainbow Energy in here, just so that way you can attack with something like Weavile if necessary. There are a couple of instances where Feint Attack is incredibly useful. It's very nice for hitting baby Pokemon that happen to be stuck on the bench, and it's just a good, quick prize there. It can also come out of nowhere thanks to Shaman. I do have a small Shaman Jirachi engine in here, because I think it's just too good to not include in some way for Dragapult. Time Hollow is also a very effective attack.
It's so good.
Even if you aren't going in with the idea of doing 150 everywhere, there's also a small sub-plan where you can kind of snipe around, thanks to the amount of reversals in the deck, especially paired with the full playset of Junk Arm, that maxes you out at potentially 7 switch effects, potentially 7 gust effects. So you can kind of, if your opponent's playing stage 1s or stage 2s, you can choose where you do the 60 damage and then come in with a Jirachi to Time Hollow, take the KOs.
I want to make a quick point here. Weavile Undaunted is one of my absolute favorite cards in this format. Feint Attack is insane, and Claw Snag is so much fun. I think just the combination is mwah, it's lovely. How do I say this? How well do you think this deck performs? Like, I love the concept, but it doesn't seem like the best Dragapult build to me.
Yeah, this deck was a lot of theory, and it's not really backed up by its play a whole lot. You have a lot of consistency issues, because you're running a very thick stage 2 and then 2 stage 1 lines on top of that.
And that goes back to what we said about decklist space.
Yeah, like, ideally, I would love for this deck to be able to fit a full 4/4 Weavile, because the idea of being able to, like, double Weavile your opponent, knock him down to 1 card, yes, I love that. Like, there's just not enough space.
And I also think this list goes into a point that I'm going to elaborate on later, but I don't think Dragapult alone is good enough to get the job done. I don't think this is a format where you can just have 3 Dragapult and win the game with them. You're going to need some other attacker, which this list doesn't have, which can cause problems if you run out of Dragapult or you can't get another one set up.
Yeah. One of the big things with Dragapult is you want to pair it with something efficient, some kind of consistency engine. So whether that is Magnezone to continue to allow you to draw cards, or Donphan, something that both soaks up damage and deals out considerable damage for 1 energy. Like you really, Dragapult needs a partner. It's completely awful on its own. It's not usually worth it in my opinion.
Which feels weird, right? Like, this card seems so great, and I think one of the biggest things that we learned is that it's not good enough on its own.
It's a really interesting counterpoint to a lot of people who felt that Dragapult is too good for 2011. All of its stats are pretty era correct, with the exception of resistance, but that doesn't come in super often.
You have 150 HP. It's not like it's going to be the difference between dying or not.
Yeah, exactly. And then it's not good on its own. There's really no other way to put it.
Now, these were the 4 lists that you and I brought to our session, and these are the 4 lists that will be featured in all of the games that we played and that I will be uploading on this channel sometime soon. We'll see when it happens, but I certainly intend to upload every single game. I think we had some good ones, some not so good ones, but overall it was a very productive session, and I think we learned a lot. So, what did you learn from our testing about Dragapult?
So, what I learned is kind of what we were saying, where Dragapult just simply needs a partner in some aspect. Additionally, your choices are either Dragapult plus consistency or Dragapult plus efficiency. It's up to you as to which one you pick. I feel part of that comes down to if you're playing in an event of some kind, it would be a meta call. Just as if you're playing in a gauntlet, just kind of personal feel.
Yeah, I think Dragapult, the way you discuss consistency and efficiencies, because I don't think Dragapult's either. It's not consistent, nor is it efficient. Like, the attacks are efficient. 1 for 60 always feels good. It's amazing how not frequently you're going to get 3 energy attachments to actually use a diving swipe without using your turbo engine. And if you're using a Shaman Jirachi engine, that's just more deck space and more inconsistency because you need to have them all. Like, getting energy in the discard pile for Jirachi is an absolute pain. I don't think there's any other way than Junk Arm or Juniper, so...
Yeah, that's why I opted for a heavy Junk Arm, 3 Juniper, 3 Sages training, kind of pulling what we know from Rush Efflosion as a deck, kind of give that basis of an engine some legs.
Okay, so these are just the decks that we brought to our play session, and we certainly learned a lot about Dragapult. So much so, in fact, that it got Scott and I thinking about where else can we take it that perhaps we didn't consider or that we now think could be really good. And so, Scott, I think you had this idea where we use a Mew Prime variant, so we just see off Dragapult. And in particular, we have considered a Mew Prime Vileplume list. And so what we did was that we took, do you have the specifics? It was a Jason Klaczynski list from Heart Gold Soul Silver through NVI?
Was Jason Klaczynski's Heart Gold Soul Silver through Next Destinies, Illinois State winning U Prime list. That list also included things like Fliptini and Vanillux, as well as like Unpheasant, a couple of other techs in there. Um, However, in theory, you could use Mew, like use this list as a basis and adapt it to kind of a Dragapult base versus this Fliptini base.
Yeah, and so what we're left with is basically taking advantage of all the benefits of Dragapult, mainly the 2 attacks, without the downside of us being a stage 2. And instead we use we use Mew, and we get to use, 1 Psychic for 60. It can be great. And in addition to that, you can start using Jirachi Shaman Engine to get that energy on the battlefield, make sure you can actually start using Diving Swipe and just take your opponent out. And with the combination of an oppressive Vileplume engine, this deck certainly seems like it could be another fit for Dragapult.
Yeah, so kind of your basis here is you can turn 1 See Off or turn 1 Prehistoric Wisdom if you happen to have a Dragapult in hand, or you can Communication into a Dragapult, and then you can just sit there and you can cycle Muse as you turn around and build up this Vileplume. Then you can also turbo out the 150 thanks to Jirachi and Shaman. This list in particular may need some copies of, like maybe 1 copy of Juniper, just to complement the couple of Junk Arm and the Sage's Training, to bin your energy a little bit more often, but I'm confident that it can still perform as needed.
Yeah, so just to clarify, we have not played with this list. This is, at this point, we are purely in theory crafting zone, so who knows how this actually performs, and I'd like to give it a try, but in terms of theory, those are some of the considerations that we have for this list. And it does seem like it could be a direction for Dragapult.
One of the nice things with it as well is it doesn't use Dreepy or Dracloak. So if you're in a situation where someone's like, oh man, I really don't want to play against a deck that's also has to include Dreepy and Dracloak, like this is an option. This is probably the build you have to go with for Dragapult, in that consideration. That's an option.
And so that brings us to, by far, the elephant in the room, the biggest question about all of this, right? This whole time we've been discussing under the assumption that Dragapult is allowed, but now we need to actually ask ourselves, is Dragapult allowed? And Scott, I think this discussion needs to be twofold. I think one of the first consideration we need to have is Dragapult too good? Because as we discussed long ago, it feels like now, with those other leaked Pokemon, the biggest concern easily was that they're just too good, right? Zacian, Toxicity, they're just busted. So we need to ask ourselves, does Dragapult deserve to be written off because it's busted, or will it work? And then, of course, the question is, okay, listen, it's called old format. Why are we putting new cards into old format? Is this even okay? Which will probably be the most controversial point of discussion for all of this, no matter whether we're talking about Dragapult or one of the other Pokemon that we haven't seen yet. But before we get there, let's just first discuss, straight up, is Dragapult too good to be allowed in 2011?
I think that Dragapult is 100% within the realms of 2011 power level. It has a lot of factors that offset it. If it was a stage 1, that'd probably be too good. If it did, 10, 20 more damage on any of the attacks, yeah, it'd probably be too good. If it, add 20, 30 extra HP, yeah, it'd probably be too good. If it had a different weakness, that'd probably be too good. If all of these factors line up in a way so that way it's just this perfect storm of this Pokemon works in the format. It's good in the format, but not oppressively so. And it could potentially create a whole new pillar of 2011.
I agree that Dragapult fits perfectly in the format, and frankly, I'm going to disagree about it creating a new pillar. I don't think Dragapult is that good to warrant shaking up the metagame that much. There are certainly ways to counter Dragapult, and depending on what people decide to do with Dragapult and its legality, then there might be more decks with Vileplume, Zoroark, Jirachi, whatever you need to defeat it. But ultimately, I think Dragapult is just, it's good. I think we have shown through discussion and also through gameplay that Dragapult's weaknesses are like potent. These aren't things that just make the deck, oh, it's not as good. These are things that really hurt it. And I think the biggest part is just because it's a stage 2 that can't live on its own. You can't just run 4 Dragapult and expect to win everything. You're going to get shut down. And because of that, the card is weak enough that you have to start building around it in your decks. You know, this isn't like, oh, all of a sudden, instead of Yanmega Magnezone, we're going to throw a Dragapult in there too and call it a day. You need to really think about how you're building a Dragapult deck. And even then, it'll probably be really good, but I don't think it's anywhere close to the BDIF. We played with the truth. And spoiler alert for that video, the truth destroyed Dragapult. There was semblance of a chance that Dragapult was going to win that game, and then it all fell through because the truth is just the best deck in the format, and it did exactly what it's supposed to do. And to me, if you're not going to be able to overthrow the truth as the best deck in the format, then there's no reason we should ever discuss not being legal.
Yeah, and I think that's a large portion of it. Where I was coming from with the pillar is the idea that it's a bit of a glass cannon deck. It has enough strength behind it so that way, it's a deck that could, if it had existed within 2011 timeline, you could see it topping an event, much in the same way that you could see Prime Time topping an event, or Stage 1's topping an event, The Truth topping an event. And this is just potentially one of the other kind of pillars in that, you know, it's a deck that you have an option with.
I agree. I think Dragapult is good, and the decks you can build with it are good. But I don't think Dragapult is worthy of being too good for 2011. Maybe if there were good Pokemon to actually switch into, you know, a Mr. Mime or a Spiritomb or a Substitute Doll or whatever you need. But as it stands, I think Dragapult is just okay. So final verdict for that. I think Dragapult should be legal in 2011. It's not busted. What do you think, Scott?
I think the entire evolution line is perfectly okay to include.
Oh yeah, me too. Dreepy and Dracloak, I think they fit perfectly. Allowing Dragapult allows the stage 1 in basic, yeah. So that brings us to the final question, the one that is the most important. Should we even be allowing these celebration Pokemon in old format? What are we doing here? Why are we even talking about this? These are cards that were not released in 2011. They were not legal at that Worlds tournament. So why are we playing it in these decks?
So I think there's a couple of different trains of thought here, a couple of different schools of thought. On one hand, you have a whole bunch of people who want to use old format as kind of a snapshot of history. Here is what the game looked like. And to those people, yeah, you can still play old format that way. You know, no one is forcing you to play against Dragapult. No one is forcing you to play with Dragapult. It's old format is meant to be casual. It's meant to be something people can just sit down and enjoy with friends. And anything that kind of wrecks that feel for them, and yeah, go ahead and do without it. The flip side of things, though,
I think you can say old format is more than just a casual way to play. Personally, I think it's the casual way to play. Pokemon TCG doesn't have too many casual ways to play, like format wise. And of all the options, old format is like the way to play casually, right? Which basically means we can do whatever we want, such as allowing these cards.
And that's one of the things is old format doesn't get vitalized. You know, like in other casual formats and other games, you know, you do have new sets that release, new cards that release, that kind of shake things up and keep it constantly changing and whatnot. With old format, everything is static. There's very few instances where someone comes out years down the road and they go, "Oh, I broke it. I broke 2007 or 09 or base through Neo." You know, like here is this new deck that just turns everything on its head, and we have to reconsider how all these events would have played out. That doesn't happen in old format because everything is static. Everything has been found. The two formats where you could argue that this isn't true is 2004, where building is kind of all over the place, and we didn't quite have a lot of the knowledge that we have now.
We have seen an immense renaissance in 2004. Like, that format has it is like unrecognizable from a few years ago. The way people are building decks now, just as a side note, I love it. I love the way that's been going. Like, running 2 or 3 Ditto and Blaziken is so cool. Sorry, I think 2004 is a great example of what we should be looking for in old format, which these cards could contribute to.
Then, like, the other format where this has kind of happened organically has been in 2011 itself. We've seen a lot of people devoting time, energy, and resources to kind of figuring this out because it had such a short lifespan. Especially with the idea of, you know, for Worlds, no one realized Tropical Beach was going to be legal until the morning of. It's the biggest reason why Ross's copy of The Truth only runs the one copy. It's because, you know, he couldn't find copies in time. He couldn't find what cuts in the deck to make in time. And so we see a lot of people revisiting 2011 in terms of, all right, let's say everyone realizes Beach is legal. How does this impact the decks? And that's not a whole lot different from what we're doing with, all right, Dragapult is legal. How does this impact the decks?
I agree. And 2011 in particular doesn't get maybe a chance as people should. It's not as respected. And there's definitely a lot to learn here. I honestly, even just through testing Dragapult, I feel like I learned a lot about the format in general. For example, Vileplume probably should be played more. So should Jirachi, and so should Weavile. You know, all these different things where introducing Dragapult just makes even more fun, more exciting, because it's not like this is a perfect stable system that is suddenly being thrown all out of whack. I think there's still a lot of movement to be had in the meta game and in the format, that throwing in Dragapult, hey, that'll just make it more fun, gives us more interesting things to think about.
Like, at the end of the day, it comes down to let people have fun in the way that they want to have fun. If you're not harming anyone, then yeah, go right ahead. If you want to sit down, you want to play with Dragapult, play with Dragapult. If you want to sit down, you don't want to play with Dragapult, yeah, no one's forcing you to. And that's kind of one of the beauties of old format. You can apply the exact same ideology to decks as well. Now, in 2006, you want to sit down and you want to play Mulock, that's more power to you. Not everyone's going to enjoy sitting down and playing that as well. So it comes down to kind of going back to that whole idea of this is the casual way to play.
I think at this point it's pretty evident which side of the fence Scott and I are on, but I do want to give a bit more acknowledgement to why we shouldn't be allowing these cards. And the historical aspect certainly is a big one. You know, old format, its initial purpose was to be a time capsule. It was, you know, as our good friend Kara Quaren said, the idea of old format is that you can pull out your deck from the deck box and look at it and feel like you actually were back in the year 2011, ready to go. This deck has been sitting in this deck box for 10, 15 years, however old your format is, and it's the exact same as it always has been. And I think there is something to that, let's be real, that's why we all came to old format in the first place, right? And so to suddenly disturb that can be problematic for sure. And the other side of the coin is like, this is the same format we've been playing for 10 years. Why would you ever let new cards in? There's a reason why we stopped when we did when it came to introducing new cards. So all of a sudden allowing a card printed in 2021 to be legal in a format that's 10, 15, 20 years old, it goes against the entire point of what we're doing here. You know, especially because, like, for some of us, old format is an escape from the formats where cards are being printed and we do have to keep up and we do have to keep switching our decks, or certain cards suddenly suck because of power creep or what have you. With these cards, they were designed when they were designed. And as we saw with some of the leaks, not all of these Pokemon from Celebrations are as accurate as they should be. And so why should we trust Dragapult or Mimikyu or Hydreigon C when clearly they're still not with it when it comes to how these cards should be designed? I think a big reason why people come to old format is because power creep can suck. We want to play a format where stage 2s are actually viable. We want to play a format that has actual real disruption in the form of Rocket's Admin or POW Hand Extension or Cessation Crystal or Battle Frontier or Crystal Beach, etc., etc., etc. We want to play in a timeline where things were right, if that makes sense. Whatever format you think that happens in is up to you, but at the end of the day, we play old format because we like the way the cards were at that time, and we want to keep playing with them. So all of a sudden, having these new cards come in, it defeats the entire point of old format, right?
Yeah, and I think that kind of comes down to what is old format for you, and that's a question that you have to answer on a personal level, and a lot of basically every old format player has to answer on a personal level. And you know, why am I playing this? What does old format do for me? And if you're in one camp, then Dragapult makes perfect sense. These celebration promos make perfect sense. And if you're in the other camp, these cards make zero sense. Why would you ever use them?
And I think it's a question that you need to ask yourself more than once, because I know for sure my philosophy has changed over time. When I first got into old format, I was all about the historical aspect, the time capsule. We're here to preserve the deck lists that won. And over time, my outlook has changed. I have kind of more recently started to reject the idea of keeping lists intact the way they were at the time. And I've started to move into this school of thought, I guess, of I want to innovate. I think it's cool to challenge what we know about these formats in these metagames and to branch off and to find new techs, new ways to build lists, new archetypes maybe. And so if you had asked me about Dragapult 5 years ago when I started old format, I don't know how I would have reacted, but I probably would have been a little weirded out by the concept. But now that I'm in this mindset of wanting to change things, well, what's more powerful of a change than adding a new card?
Yeah, like I can tell you right now that, you know, five years ago when you started playing old format, you would have absolutely hated Dragapult.
I agree. I would have been pissed. And if you don't like the idea of these celebrations Pokemon being added, I think it's fair. I personally am very optimistic about these new cards. With cautiously optimistic, I understand that we need to do a card by card basis on whether or not these cards should be allowed, but I am optimistic that we will probably find a few, not many, but at least a couple that will be fine in these old formats. And I welcome that with open arms. But that's how I feel about it. And at the end of the day, Celebrations is a celebration of the game and its history. And all of us for old format, what we're doing more of than anything is celebrating this game's history. Wouldn't you agree?
100%.
Scott, what are your final remarks on all of this?
I think that we've touched a lot on Dragapult in 2011. We also haven't really thought about or discussed much at all, like Dragapult in other formats where it would have been legal. Things like Heart Gold, Soul Silver through Noble Victories for cities the following year, or even the 2012 format Heart Gold, Soul Silver through Dark Explorers.
Or maybe 2010, depending on what we decide Dragapult would have been printed in.
Yeah. So there's the potential impact on 2010. There's the impact it would have had on Majestic Dawn through Call of Legends, and so looking at like one format can seem a little bit short-sighted. I think overall this card seems to be fairly balanced across all those formats. Working your way from front back, in 2012, it just gets absolutely destroyed by Darkrai. The card doesn't exist. that's short of it.
Well, plus it's a stage 2. If it's not a basic Pokemon, you're not going to play it in 2012. End of story.
The only potential deck you would play it in would be like Gothitelle, since you could create an argument there, but at that point you're also looking at consistency issues, on top of being Dark Weak, and that just creates a whole slew of issues. Moving back to Heart Gold, Soul Silver through Noble Victories, I think there's the potential where you can pair it with other cards. I think your Mew decks start becoming a little more toolboxy, and maybe just including a copy of Dragapult as a pivoting option, or if you happen to build up 3 energy on your Mew. You could also potentially build some weird amalgamation of Chandelure with like 101 line of Dragapult. I think as time goes on, Dragapult's existence and pervasiveness in the format will dwindle. And moving forward 2011, Majestic Dawn through Call of Legends, I think with an unnerfed Candy, it gets a lot better. However, you're still battling against decks like Vilegar, which is going to be a massive issue for you. And with that deck being so prominent and prevalent in 2011 pre-rotation, Dragapult probably isn't at its best there. And even if it were to be legal in 2010, it's not exactly beating like Gardevoir or Gengar. Like those are your other like prime stage 2 psychic Pokemon, and it's not necessarily doing anything better than either of those.
Plus, I mean, you don't have DCE options. You're never actually getting 3 energy onto a Dragapult. That's just not going to happen.
Your only way you're doing it is through some kind of acceleration, and you don't have good options for that in 2010. In 2011 pre-rotation, you have Some options still, you clearly have things like the Shaman Jirachi engine. You have to weigh that against, just Bilegar was such an oppressive deck in that format that I'm not sure their stage 2 decks can really keep up with it to too much of a degree.
I think what I learned about all this is that theorizing about these cards isn't enough. I think we need to play them and test them. And doing so will give us a much better understanding of where these cards fit in any given format or metagame, whether or not they should be allowed. And if we do end up going down this path of taking every card individually and determining whether it's allowed and in which formats, it certainly will be a lot. And frankly, it might be the case that we all just decide it's not worth it. Who knows? Before we actually started playing with Dragapult, I was scared Dragapult would be too good. There was a part of me that was scared that we would sit down and start a play and it would just demolish everything. And just all of a sudden Dragapult it'd just be too good. We couldn't play with it.
I think it's really interesting when you go back and you look at our lists, because it feels almost like your lists are looking at things of, how does Dragapult fit in this format, whereas I was kind of looking at from a sense of how do I show that Dragapult doesn't fit in this format? What's the most broken things I can be doing with Dragapult?
And it seems like despite our divergent ideas, we came to the same conclusion, which is, yeah, it's good. Well, we have talked a lot about Dragapult. We've talked a lot about this whole concept. And what I want most from this discussion, what we want most, is that we want to promote conversation and discussion about these cards. Where do you think Celebrations fits in old format? Do you think we should allow any of these cards? Do you think we should allow certain cards? Do you think Dragapult is viable in 2011? And that's okay. What do you think of our deck lists? Did we go down the right path of how to build it? Do you have a different idea that's better? Or do you just have a way to improve the ideas we've already come up with? We want to hear from you, whether it's in the YouTube comments, whether it's on Facebook, whether it's on Twitter, again, at the DivTCG for Scott. Facebook at Snowpoint Temple is generally where we will have our discussions. No matter where you end up having this conversation, we want to hear your thoughts and your feelings about Dragapult Prime, about Celebrations, and about the whole concept of new Pokemon in old decks. And also, does anyone else think it's cool that these old mechanics are coming back? This is like a dream.
I'm just excited to see what Greninja Star does, because that's like the one that hasn't been revealed yet.
I agree. It seems like a lot of other people agree too. Oh, I imagine that art is going to be absolutely delicious. Ugh, that cannot wait to see Greninja Star. I hope that it's not busted. Maybe we can actually get to play with it. But even if it is, who cares? It's a new gold star. That's amazing. So with all of that, we've certainly talked about a lot, and we could probably go on forever, but this discussion has to end at some point. So again, hit us up on social media, in the comments. We would love to hear what you think. And hey, maybe next time you see me, I'll be rocking Dragapult. Who knows?